Have you ever walked away from a family gathering feeling more drained than joyful? Maybe someone made a comment that stung a little. Or maybe it was the silence. No one said anything outright, but the tension was heavy in the air. You tried to be kind, to keep the peace, but inside, you were holding back a storm of emotions. If any of that sounds familiar, I want you to know something right from the start. You are not alone, and there is nothing wrong with you for feeling that way. As we grow older, we carry not just memories, but entire histories, patterns, expectations, unspoken rules, generational habits. And sometimes, these invisible threads are the very reason why being around our family, people we love, can feel more exhausting than comforting. That's what we're going to talk about today. Why your family might stress you out, what's really going on beneath the surface, and, most importantly, what you can do about it to find more peace and power in your life, starting right now. Let's take a deep breath together. This is a conversation about healing. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means understanding. It means choosing what you carry forward and what you finally get to set down. Now, I want to begin with something that might surprise you. If your family dynamics have ever made you feel small, overwhelmed, unimportant, or just emotionally tired, that doesn't mean you're too sensitive or weak. In fact, it could be something much deeper. This brings us to a powerful truth. You may be carrying multigenerational pain, wounds that didn't start with you, but got passed down like family recipes, whether anyone meant to or not. See, no family is perfect. But when patterns of hurt or silence or emotional distance repeat themselves over decades, they form what we call intergenerational trauma. It's not always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it looks like always putting yourself last, always staying quiet to avoid conflict, feeling responsible for everyone's peace but never getting your own. Many of us learned these behaviors because our parents did too, and their parents before them. In those days, survival came first. Emotional health? That was a luxury. So emotions got buried. Hard conversations never happened. Apologies were rare. And by the time we entered the world, we were already handed a script. You might have grown up in a home where no one ever said, "I'm sorry," or "I'm proud of you." Or maybe love was shown through food or work or rules, but never through listening. It's no wonder then that when we try to speak up now, it feels unnatural, maybe even a little scary. But I want to tell you something important. You don't have to carry it all anymore. And you have every right to ask, why do I feel this way around the people I love? Because that question is the beginning of change. Now let's talk about siblings. You'd think that growing up in the same house would mean shared memories, shared understandings. But here's the truth. No two siblings ever grow up in the exact same household. Your birth order, your role in the family, the expectations placed on you, these things can all be very different. One child might have gotten more attention, while another was expected to grow up faster. Maybe you were the peacemaker, the responsible one, or the invisible one who learned to stay out of the way. And years later, these roles don't just disappear. They follow us into adulthood, into holidays and reunions and phone calls where something just feels off. Maybe you try to express how you felt growing up, and your brother says, "That's not what happened." Maybe your sister insists, "We had the same childhood, and I turned out fine." And there you are again, silenced, dismissed, wounded. But here's the thing. Your truth is still your truth, even if no one else sees it. You do not need their validation to heal. Let that sink in. Now I want to talk to those of you who were the child that had to grow up too soon. Maybe your parents were working all the time, or one of them struggled with addiction or mental health, or simply wasn't emotionally available. So you stepped up. You helped raise your siblings. You kept the house in order. You knew when to stay quiet. You learned how to survive. But here's the heartbreaking part. You were just a child, and no one was tucking you in. No one was asking how you were doing. You learned to be the strong one, the fixer, the helper, the one who couldn't afford to fall apart. That kind of burden leaves a mark. And now, as an adult, maybe you find it hard to ask for help. Maybe you never feel safe resting, even when you're tired. Maybe you still believe your worth depends on what you do for others. But what if I told you, you deserve to rest now? You don't have to earn your place in the family by overfunctioning anymore. You have a right to peace, a right to be cared for. You don't have to be the one holding everything together, especially when no one sees what it costs you. Now let's talk about what happens when you start changing. You might start setting boundaries, speaking up, taking care of your emotional health. Maybe you start saying no more often, or you stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. And guess what? That change might not go over well. Because the moment you start healing, you shine a light on things other people might not be ready to see. And that can feel threatening, so they mock you. They say, "You're different now." They tell you you're too emotional or too sensitive or that you're overreacting. But hear me clearly, just because they don't like your growth doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. In fact, it means you're doing something right. You're breaking a pattern that has gone unquestioned for too long. And breaking cycles is not comfortable, but it is powerful. There's a reason they call it cycle breaking. It takes courage. And yes, it can feel lonely sometimes. But you are not alone in this. The most important thing is that you keep choosing yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a healing way. Because when you show up differently, you teach the next generation what's possible. You show your grandchildren that emotions aren't shameful. That rest is allowed. That love can be kind, not conditional. You show your grown children that it's okay to apologize, to talk about hard things, to repair what's been broken. Even if your family never joins you in this healing work, your journey still matters. You matter. And your story is still unfolding. Now take another deep breath. You've made it this far in the video because something inside you knows it's time. Time to stop carrying what's not yours. Time to let go of the old roles. Time to choose peace. Not silence, but real peace. And you can start today. As you begin to see these patterns more clearly, something interesting tends to happen. You might notice that you are changing before anyone else does. You pause more often. You don't rush to fix everything. You feel your emotions instead of swallowing them. And while that shift can feel relieving inside your own body, it can also create tension around you, especially with family. That's because families are systems. And systems like things to stay the same. When one person changes, the balance shifts. Roles that have existed for decades suddenly don't work the way they used to. The quiet one starts speaking. The fixer steps back. The one who always says yes begins to say no. And that can make other people uncomfortable, even if they can't explain why. So if you've ever noticed resistance from your family when you start taking better care of yourself, please know this: it's not because you're wrong. It's because you're no longer playing the role they're used to. Sometimes that resistance shows up as teasing. What's gotten into you? Sometimes it sounds like guilt. After all we've done for you. And sometimes it's dismissal. You're reading too much into things. That can hurt deeply, especially when all you're trying to do is feel calmer and more at peace. What helps in those moments is remembering one simple truth. People can only meet you at the level they've met themselves. If someone has spent a lifetime avoiding their feelings, your emotional honesty can feel threatening. If someone learned to survive by staying busy or silent, your boundaries can feel like rejection. You don't need to convince them. You don't need to explain yourself perfectly. And you don't need their permission to change. You're allowed to grow, even if others stay the same. Now let's talk about something very practical and very powerful. How you know you're actually breaking the cycle, not just thinking about it. Many people assume healing means never getting upset again, never feeling triggered, never feeling hurt. But that's not realistic, and it's not the goal. Healing doesn't mean your family suddenly becomes easy. It means you respond differently. One of the clearest signs you're breaking the cycle is something very small but incredibly meaningful. You gain a pause. Instead of reacting instantly, you feel a moment, sometimes just a second, where you notice what's happening inside you. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, your jaw clenches. And instead of snapping, withdrawing, or shutting down, you breathe. That pause is everything. That pause is you choosing differently than you were taught. For many people, especially those who grew up needing to stay alert or manage other people's emotions, reactions were automatic. There was no space to choose. You survived by reacting fast. So when you begin to pause, even briefly, you're reclaiming something that may have been taken from you long ago. Your sense of control. You might still feel angry or sad. You might still feel hurt. But you don't let those feelings drive the bus anymore. You stay with yourself. Another sign you're breaking the cycle is that you stop trying to be understood by people who have never tried to understand you. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop chasing validation where it's never been available. There's a quiet strength that comes with that shift. You begin to trust your own experience. You don't need everyone to agree with you in order to know what you lived through. You may also notice that you feel less guilty for taking care of yourself. At first, self-care might feel selfish. Rest might feel uncomfortable. Saying no might make your heart race. But over time, that guilt softens. You begin to realize that exhaustion is not a badge of honor. That constantly giving does not make you more lovable. That your needs matter too. And that realization can change everything. Now let's talk about what healing actually looks like in everyday life, because this part is important. Healing is not something you do once and check off a list. It's something you practice gently, often in very ordinary moments. It might start in the morning, before anyone else is awake. Instead of rushing into the day, you sit quietly for a moment. You notice how your body feels. You take a few slow breaths. Nothing fancy. Just enough to remind your nervous system that you are safe. As the day goes on, you begin to pay attention to when your body gets tense. Maybe it's a phone call. Maybe it's a memory. Maybe it's a certain topic that always brings up stress. When you notice that tension, you don't push it away. You don't tell yourself to get over it. You simply slow down. You breathe a little deeper. You ground yourself in the moment. Some people find gentle movement helpful. Rocking slightly in a chair, stretching, walking slowly and deliberately. These small movements tell your body that it doesn't have to stay in fight or flight mode. Others find comfort in humming softly or speaking kindly to themselves. You might quietly say, "I'm okay right now," or "I don't have to solve this today." These may seem like small things, but they add up. They retrain your nervous system. They teach your body a new language, one of safety instead of survival. And when your nervous system feels calmer, your relationships begin to change too. Not because other people change, but because you do. You may notice that you don't engage in arguments the way you used to. You don't take the bait. You don't feel the same urge to defend or explain yourself. Instead, you respond with clarity. Sometimes with silence. Sometimes with a simple sentence. Sometimes with a boundary that feels firm but not harsh. That's another sign of healing. Your reactions align more with who you want to be, not who you had to be. There's also something else that often surprises people on this journey. As you heal, you may feel grief. Real grief. Grief for the childhood you didn't get. Grief for the emotional support that was missing. Grief for the version of yourself that had to grow up too soon. This grief doesn't mean you're going backward. It means you're finally allowing yourself to feel what was postponed. And as painful as that grief can be, it's also freeing. Because once you feel it, it doesn't control you anymore. You may even find moments of compassion for yourself and sometimes even for your parents or siblings. Not to excuse harm, but to understand the context. To see the limits they were living within. Compassion doesn't mean staying in unhealthy situations. It means letting go of the fantasy that things could have been different if only you had tried harder. You did enough. You were enough. As this understanding settles in, something beautiful begins to happen. You start living more in the present. You enjoy simple moments more deeply. You feel more at ease in your own skin. And slowly, Quietly, the cycle loosens its grip. You're no longer living from old rules that no longer serve you. You're creating something new, something calmer, kinder, and more honest. And that matters, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after you. Take a moment to notice how far you've already come. The fact that you're here, listening, reflecting, choosing awareness, that alone speaks volumes about your strength. There is still more to unfold, more peace to claim, and more freedom ahead. And it begins again and again with small choices made gently, one day at a time. Stay with yourself. You're doing something meaningful. By now, you may be realizing just how much of your story was never just about you. The tension, the exhaustion, the heavy moments that followed you home after family dinners, they were often symptoms of something older, something inherited. Patterns passed down quietly, invisibly, until someone, you, finally decided to stop and ask, does it really have to be this way? And the beautiful, powerful truth is, no, it doesn't. Because healing doesn't just happen in therapy offices or in deep conversations. Sometimes it happens in the quiet decision to respond differently, to sit with discomfort instead of avoiding it, to let go of what you can't control, and to choose peace over performance. But what if your family never fully sees the work you're doing? What if they don't say, thank you, or I see your effort, or I'm proud of you? That can be one of the hardest parts of healing, doing it without applause, without recognition, without the very validation you've longed for since you were small. That's why one of the most powerful tools you can ever develop is self-validation. The ability to tell yourself the truth and believe it, even when others can't or won't. I matter. What I went through matters. I am allowed to change. I am allowed to grow, even if others stay the same. You may not have been given that kind of support growing up, but you can give it to yourself now. And if you're thinking, but it's too late, let me gently challenge that. It is never too late to become the person you needed when you were younger. I once worked with a woman who began this journey in her early 80s. For the first time in her life, she stopped apologizing for having needs. She began speaking more softly to herself. She even reached out to her grandchildren with new honesty, sharing pieces of her story that had been buried for decades. And you know what happened? They didn't reject her. They drew closer. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do for your family is not to be perfect, but to be real. To model what it looks like to feel, to forgive, to take responsibility without carrying the entire burden alone. That's the real legacy you can pass on. And you don't need to change anyone else to do it. Your children may or may not come around. Your siblings may never understand. But you can still live with integrity. You can still choose to break the emotional cycle, starting from the inside out. And that's the part many people overlook. This isn't just about fixing relationships with others. This is about the relationship you have with yourself. Because the more you learn to stay calm, stay present, and stay rooted in your truth, the less power other people's reactions will have over you. That doesn't mean you become cold or distant. Quite the opposite. It means you show up with clarity, with warmth that doesn't bend into guilt, with love that isn't afraid to say no when needed. You begin to feel what so many people go their whole lives without feeling: inner safety. That's when the real transformation begins. You walk into a family gathering and you're not consumed with worry about what someone might say. You hear an old trigger and instead of reacting, you breathe. You choose your response. You walk away proud of how you handled yourself. And maybe, for the first time, you actually enjoy the moment you're in, not because everyone changed, but because you did. This is the work of cycle breaking, and it's often invisible. But its impact, it's immense. Now, let's get even more practical. What does it look like to live this way every day? Not just during family events or deep conversations, but in the rhythm of your regular life. It can start first thing in the morning. You wake up, and instead of reaching for your phone or diving into a to-do list, you take 2 minutes to breathe. You check in with your body. How am I feeling today? Not what needs to get done, but what you need to feel grounded. That small habit might lead to something else. A short walk, a few minutes of journaling, or maybe a quiet moment with a cup of tea where you simply sit and enjoy the stillness. No rush, no guilt, just being. And throughout the day, you begin to notice your own emotional waves. You recognize that sharp moment when someone's words feel dismissive. You feel your body tense. But instead of pushing that feeling away or lashing out, you pause. You breathe. You remember that you have a choice, 1 breath, 1 second. That's all it takes to reclaim your peace. And as you continue this practice, something even deeper emerges: compassion. You begin to look at your parents not through rose-colored glasses, but with clarity and grace. You understand they had limits. Maybe they were doing the best they could with what they had. That doesn't erase the pain, but it gives you room to hold 2 truths at once. They hurt you, and they were human. And you look at your children, not just as your kids, but as adults carrying their own burdens, wounds, and confusion. You start seeing not just what they did wrong, but what they may have learned from you, both the good and the not so good. This isn't about blame. It's about breaking the pattern by becoming aware. You begin to model something different. You apologize when you need to. You name your emotions instead of hiding them. You tell your grown children, "I'm still learning," and you mean it. And that honesty, it becomes the bridge. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but over time, it has the power to bring people closer, even when things have been fractured for years. Because families don't heal through silence. They heal through connection. And connection begins when someone, you, chooses to be present even when it's hard. So if you're listening right now and your heart is feeling heavy with regret or sadness or even guilt, please know this: you are not broken. You are brave. You are choosing to do something most people avoid their entire lives. You are facing the truth, not with bitterness, but with courage. And you are passing forward something new. A legacy of awareness, of gentleness, of growth. That matters more than you know. If you've made it this far, take a moment to reflect, not on what you still have to fix, but on how far you've come. The fact that you've stayed with this conversation, that you've asked hard questions, that you've opened your heart to a new way of being, that is the start of something beautiful. And I want to leave you with one final thought. You are allowed to enjoy your life. Even if your family is complicated, even if your childhood was difficult, even if some relationships never fully heal, you are allowed joy. You are allowed rest. You are allowed freedom. You have already carried so much. Maybe now is the time to set some of it down. Thank you for being here with me. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your story matters. You never know who else might need to hear it. And if you'd like more videos like this, videos that help you understand yourself, heal, and live with more strength and peace, make sure to subscribe to this channel, Strong Elderly Life. We're building a community here. A place where healing, wisdom, and dignity are always welcome. So let's keep walking this journey together. Here's to you. Here's to breaking the cycle. And here's to living your best, most peaceful life at any age. You've earned it.